Okay, so more people will be joining in, but we'll get started. So welcome everyone to the first journal club of the year, and the first journal club of a new era. So for those new to Journal Club, hope you find it an informative session today between David and myself, and David will introduce himself further later. For those who've been part of the Journal Club community for a while, I hope to make this half as good as the ones that Chris facilitated in the past. So this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Brain and Mind Center's YouTube page afterwards. So if you do have to leave early for any reason, you can always just watch back the rest of it in your own time. Dave and I encourage you to ask your questions and make your comments both throughout the first part of today's webinar and then into the Q&A function afterwards. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat. Just makes this a lot easier for us to track the questions that we have or have not addressed. And then also to get a copy of the questions that might be left outstanding afterwards that we can do offline via email. So just to introduce a little bit myself for those who don't know me, Adrian Ienna is my name. I'm a clinical psychologist working for GambleAware Blue Mountains in Western Sydney. And so I've been in this role for GambleAware for a few years now. And you might have seen me in journal clubs in the past, doing the moderation in the background, but I've now kind of stepped into Chris's shoes. And we'll be co-facilitating journal clubs into the future. And so I just want to warmly welcome David today, and I'll let him introduce himself before we kind of outline what we're going to be speaking about.
Thanks, Adrian, and good morning, everyone. So my name's David Clayton. I'm a software engineer, amongst other things. With respect to today's discussion, I worked with IGT for 5 years. So I graduated from University of Wollongong in 1997. I got my first graduate job as a software engineer at IGT in 1998, and I worked there until 2003. In fact, it was 5 years to the day that I worked there. I started at IGT fixing bugs in the software department and what normal graduate engineers do. And that went on for a year or two. And we had a bit of a company merger. And I was sitting down one day and going through the code as we did. We were encouraged to read the code, and become familiar with the systems there. And I found a couple of flaws in some of the code that I was looking at, particularly the random number generator. Anyway, senior engineer, happened to be the head of the R&D department, looked over my shoulder and said, "What are you doing?" And I explained it. And he looked at some of the material I was reading. He said, "Oh, you understand this stuff?" I said, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with it. And he said, "Well, how about you come to the R&D department?" That started another trajectory for the next couple of years at IGT. They sent me over to the head office in Reno, Nevada. Lived over there for a little bit and worked between Australia and America, developing jurisdictional protocols for linked jackpots and that sort of thing. Not so much the actual mechanics of the games, but more the communications protocols, so a little bit low level, which is where I've normally been in the code, a bit more mathematical. So that went on for a couple of years, and that was the bulk of my 20s, I suppose, after uni. It was a nice place to work. It was good fun. You got to keep it in context. It was the sort of middle of the tech boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. So, things like stock options and working in Silicon Valley and things like that were extremely exciting to a young engineer. And it was also a really fun place to work, video games at lunchtime and Nerf gun fights when you're supposed to be working, that sort of thing. So, and yeah, really interesting people, some very, very clever people. But I also, through working with the game development department, I for the first time, really, I'd known a couple of people who played EGMs, and I didn't have a huge high opinion of the actual industry, but I met some really hard players who were the game designers, the guys who actually developed the look and feel of the games and the way they played. And I felt, I guess it was a little bit unfortunate, some of their circumstances, just the way they'd come into the industry. So with me, it was a bright-eyed, sparkly, engineer and a fabulous career with moderate pay and exciting. And some people not so. But yeah, look, I worked there for 5 years. The last couple of years, truth be told, my background's in artificial intelligence, so I pretty much automated my job. So I spent the days. I know this is going on YouTube and some people might look funny at me, but I'd pretty much automated my job and spent my day trading shares because I kind of lost interest. So when the redundancies came up, I took a redundancy and started my own consultancy. So yeah, that was pretty much my career at IGT, but it was an interesting 5 years, and I gained quite a bit of intimate knowledge with the industry and of the industry. And I guess some of that's probably dated now, but there's a lot of fundamentals there that don't change. So I'd be interested, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you today, Adrian, about that.
Yes, thanks, David, for the background, and I appreciate you going through the circumstances, that you found yourself in IGT. And yes, some of this information is from almost 2 decades ago, but the fundamentals still apply, which will be focus of today. I just want to note for anyone in the audience that might not be aware, when we say EGMs, electronic game machines, or Pokies, it's just a vernacular that we use. So just so you get that understanding. And so, we're going to break down it today into sort of 2 key components, looking into the inside mechanics of poker machines using David's expertise and knowledge. And time permits, we've got some bonus material about personification of EGMs and how we as humans personify things that don't actually have a humanistic element to it. But time permitting, we'll get to that. If not, we'll go straight into the question and answers. So again, please send through any questions or comments that you have in the chat, Q&A function, not chat function, and we'll get to them towards the second half. So to start things off, just going to orientate us all to a bit of an aggregated case study. This case study isn't representative of any one client, but just sort of a accumulation of lived experience that myself and some colleagues have heard over our time working in the gambling treatment field. And it's a way to kind of orient us towards the misconceptions about sort of how poker machines operate, and then for David to speak about the core components. So the vignette goes as follow. Robert is meeting some friends for Friday night footy at his local pub, and he purposely arrives an hour early to try and win some money on the Pokies. And so upon entering the room, he scans the Pokies for those that he's won money on before, and several are available. So he then looks at the jackpot amounts on the screens and compares the major and grand values. He also checks a ticket out amount that's displayed on the screen when he looks through the various denominations. And he ends up choosing a particular type of variant of Pokies, a lightning link, because at that point in time, it's the jackpot's high, but it's not its maximum. The ticket out is a relatively small amount. So he believes that these pieces of information are a sign that he's going to win money soon. And so he proceeds to lose $700 by the time his friends arrived. Initially, he only wanted to lose at most, worst case scenario, $200, but he kept withdrawing more amounts from the ATM in increments after his anticipation and prediction of winning one of the jackpots failed. And so by the time his friends arrive, he's in not the most pleasant mood, and spends the rest of the evening ruminating in the background about how he kind of got things so wrong. So this sort of vignette is similar to the people that I work with who experience harm from poker machines. It's this sense of they're trying to use the information that they can see to try and work out what's going to happen. But as sort of Dave and I will speak about shortly, what is really relevant and what really matters is in the world that we can't see. And so I guess, start off with David. Is there something about Robert's story that really jumps out at you of a misunderstanding of pokies?
Well, I guess the thing that stands out most about that is the past performance as no indication of potential future gains. And it's important to remember that the machine doesn't have a well, it doesn't have any thought whatsoever. It's purely a random outcome from this machine. It's the same chance of winning 2 major jackpots as it is for paying no major jackpots over a sequence of time. I guess reading this story a couple of times in the last couple of weeks has given me some thoughts about it. People tend to think with their own time scale in their head of these things, but what they don't quite understand, and what we'll get into a little bit later on with an example, is how large these timescales are. So thinking, oh well, it's got to pay soon. I mean, the scope of outcomes for that machine in your head might be, somewhere in range from, I was thinking of an example of a smaller one might be a deck of cards and saying, well, pick a card, the 2 of hearts, shuffle a deck of cards and pick off a card, and what are the chances are, it's 1 in 52 that it's a 2 of hearts. Now, applying that scope of thinking to a poker machine is so far out from the range of possible outcomes. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people go in with that scale, and it's, you can't fault people for doing that. I mean, we're not programmed, we're not wired to think in terms of the numbers and the size of the numbers that we're dealing with here. And hopefully with my example today, it might give the participants in this discussion an idea of that, some sort of numerical idea of that, and hopefully in a way that they can pass on to and use therapeutically.
So, just highlighting that, past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. I'm hearing like the industry super ads in my head right now. And, something that's kind of key to that is that random number generator. You might hear about it, even the people that gamble on poker machines, the average person might hear about it, but they might really kind of not quite understand it. So can you talk a little bit more about the RNG and its role in poker machines, David?
Okay, so basically a random number generator, we use them every day in our lives. They determine everything from when you log into your bank account, it generates that little one-time password. The foundations of that are random number generators and randomness. A random number generator is a relatively small piece of code. I think you can write one in 1 or 2 lines of code that's effective. They're very well tested for both, and I'll stick on poker machines, but cryptographically they've got to be very well tested. And I'll go into that as well. Fiddling with a random number generator can cause serious mathematical flaws in it. So generally it's the one piece of code that is not touched in a poker machine. It's tested, it's random. I did actually find a couple of examples in past source code and things like that when I was at IGT that were questionable, and we rectified those before any of them went into the market. But it's a very easy piece of code to stuff up. So I guess it's a good time to sort of discuss a couple of notes that I've got here about a random number generator for anyone who doesn't quite get it. So a random number generator needs to return a truly random number over a range of values. So if you run a random number generator for an infinite amount of time, it should return a histogram of numbers showing an even distribution across that histogram with no outliers whatsoever. So your average random number generator might run on a 32-bit, so that's 2 to the power of 32, which is about 4 billion, I think, combinations. I've got it written down some here, but if you ran that random number generator 5 times the potential possible outcomes, you should more or less get about five instances of each number within that range, distributed evenly with no sort of. You're not too worried about the order in which they come out, but that range over time needs to be even. That histogram needs to be flat. So adjusting a random number generator to make it more random can introduce unforeseen anomalies and potentially limit that range of values from those that you expect, or worse still, give an abnormal weighting to a particular section of a histogram. Now, there's computer theorists going back, Donald Knuth is one of them, who, he mathematically proved these concepts and designed a battery of, I think it might have been 12 tests that I ran of his against all of our number generators to prove that they were valid, probably more so than what might have been done externally.
Yeah, I just to interject, David, what's really kind of highlighting to myself is that term infinite, right? Is that it's when we're looking at, does the random number generator look like what we would expect? The time frame is beyond sort of like kind of the scope of human understanding or our ability to kind of perceive, and it certainly isn't relevant to the scope of time that someone is thinking in their head when they walk in and out of a venue.
Correct, yeah. And again, I think we'll get onto this with our example and the timescales based around that. I mean, look, I'm no psychologist, but I know personally it's really difficult to think of infinity. We've all got a start and an end point in our lives. And we see things, in this confined scope, no matter what you're thinking about. You can always put in your head and an upper bound on that number and a lower bound, but an infinite scale, you're talking about with respect to a random number generator. If you're just taking the raw values out of a random number generator, it doesn't really matter whether you've got a beginning or end. That distribution of numbers needs to be flat on a histogram. So you need to get essentially a flat histogram over whatever the scope. I mean, you can have an 8-bit random number generator that generates, a distribution across 256 values. And you run that 100 times, you should have 100. If you consider each value, you should have 100 of each value after you run it 100 times, give or take a small percentage. So you can take the large random number generator down and break it down to a smaller example. But on a pure random number generator that generates just pure bits, that's how it should perform.
Yeah, and it jumped out at me when you said, it doesn't matter the order that it comes out, right? And that sort of part of it is in the random number generator, the game design is not considering of any predetermined sort of order. It's just over this infinite time frame, which is really hard for us to kind of comprehend, that it will sort of kind of be where it's supposed to be, and that's something that's really important to test. And it's hard. We spoke about it earlier today, David. It's a hard coded, right? It's hard coded. It's disconnected from any other external influence. It's like a standalone thing, in the poker machine. Is that right, David?
Correct. Yes, it's most certainly I mean, it's completely. There's no way to manipulate it at all, and I think we'll touch on later on, perhaps in our myth busting section, ways that people. I've heard it as well from players. I mean, obviously, working in the industry for 5 years, I had everybody at the pub wanted to talk to me about their theories. I've heard the pub conversations. Whether that's changed in the last 20 years, probably not. But Yeah, I have been exposed to those conversations where people sort of have these theories, and it's difficult. You know, you find ways of explaining it, because I mean, as a computer scientist, as a software engineer, you want to make things as perfect as possible. That's the foundation of engineering. I mean, um, you want a random number generator, I'm going to write you the best random number generator, you know, and I'll make sure it's the best, and I'm going to test it to make sure it's the best. And that's the thought process that goes into it from a software engineer's point of view.
Yeah, great. So we got this like one part of key part of the poker machine that is, you know, not visible from the outside world. You know, going back to the vignette and Robert's story, he can't, you know, walk into the venue and see the random number generators at action. And you know, you mentioned the lead up today that there's another really core component of poker machines that again isn't kind of considered in Robert's decision making, and that's sort of like the real stopping process. In other words, how does a random number generator interact with the screen and the part of the poker machine that people can actually see? And then those misconceptions build. So again, if you could speak more to that for our audience today, that'd be great, David.
Okay, so I've been looking forward to this, because I think I've come up with a decent example that hopefully explains things. Again, you know, I mean, every machine is built and can only be calculated with a finite set of outcomes, right? Now, what your understanding of a finite set of outcomes is, and what an engineer or a, you know, mathematician's idea is, might vary by 100 million. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline, well, first of all, a couple of points about how I personally think about a machine when I'm approaching a machine, and or if somebody asks me a question, how I visualize that machine. Maybe a few little variations on that might be different, and these are obviously relevant to when I work there. Like, things may have changed, but the mathematics doesn't change. You know, the design might. And then we'll go through an example, and just to give you an idea, and hopefully give you a bit of perspective on the scale of these machines and the timeframes we're talking about. So let's take a poker machine. I'm assuming all of our participants have seen a poker machine before. So generally, you've got five reels. Now, an electronic gaming machine is not that different. Well, it's functionally, it's exactly the same as the old one-arm bandits, that you pull the reel and you've got a set of reels that spin. Now, I've always worked on an EGM, when I think in my head, of having around 33 stops per reel. So that's, each reel has 33 symbols distributed around it. Now, that's a good number for us for this example, because that gives you 33 to the power of 5, works out roughly 40 million. So 39,135,393 possibilities. So let's say 40 million. Now, some games might vary the number of stops on each reel, and some will use a different distribution of symbols. But those reels, once they're set, are fixed. They're submitted to the government for approval, and that's what the machine is tested on. Nothing changes there. That is fixed.
Just to interject, Dave, before we keep going, when you say stops per reel, you know, and you're talking about the old one-arm bandits, like they would have like things literally painted on physical drums, whereas nowadays it's more like a set of numbers that is corresponding to a slot. So when you say 33, effectively there's 33 numbers in the first reel and 33 numbers in the second reel, and that's when we start getting these big numbers up. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so it's a digital analog of the actual physical reels. And again, they don't change. Now, I look, just quickly, I have seen feature games where, you know, a reel might expand, but that really doesn't change the mathematics. We'll get to that.
Right.
So just to give you an idea, so we've got 40 million possible outcomes in a 33 stop per reel machine, and that's a good one we'll work with. Just to give you an example, a game with 50 stops per reel would be 50 to the power of 5, which is 312 million. So 40 million, 312 million. I mean, somewhere within that range is what you're playing with when you go down to your local club. Now, in between that scale, you've got Powerball. Division 1 prize in Powerball, according to Google, is 135 million. So somewhere in that between 50 and 33 real stops. Powerball's somewhere in the middle there, one in 134 million chance. Now, I've just put a note in here that I might add as well, just for the purpose of information. Multiple payline games where you can play 5 games at once. All they allow you to do, or I think you put an example here, Adrian, some of them you can play 273 lines at once. Basically what that does, it just accelerates your play. It doesn't change the outcomes. It just means you're playing 5 games at once, or 273 games at once.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of something that is commonly misunderstood is, if you go back in time to the original, physical drums, just one line straight across the screen, they've just kind of allowed you to do that simultaneously now, all the way up to 3 to the power 5. When sort of it's still the same processes going on behind the screen for each and every line.
Yeah. So, I mean, the actual game is not going to change its outcome. And I think you can do it. I might be incorrect here, but I think it's like a spread or an each way bet on the races. Like the order in which the horses finish is always going to, well, it's the same, whatever that outcome is. As soon as the race is decided, the order's the same. How you actually wager on that is just simply another way of spending more money with the same chance. Basically, it might be different in horse racing, but anyway, look, let's get on to this example because I've been really excited about talking about this. So, all right, I want to give you an idea of a way to visualize, and for the clinicians out there, this might be a way to convey to your patients. Maybe not, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how to get an idea of the number, the size of the numbers, and how that machine's working. And it's also going to give you a little bit of an insight into how these random number generators work. So. Now, I'm assuming everybody's on Zoom. Everybody's sitting in front. Sorry, I've just had something pop up on my screen. Oh, my internet's frozen, has it?
Yeah, I just I can still hear you,
okay.
but we can't see you at the moment. Actually, Dave.
Oh, I hope it drops in.
We can still hear you for now, and it kind of works well with the analogy we're about to go in terms of a blank screen. So we can still push ahead.
Okay, we'll push ahead. It might be country NBN. Who knows? Okay, so let's say you've got a standard computer screen that you're looking at the moment. Clearly less me. Now, the screen you're looking at is made from a number of pixels. So if you pick up a magnifying glass or look at that screen, you'll see that picture is constituted by a whole lot of dots. Now, a full high definition screen, full HD, if you like, your television or your computer screen, most of you probably have them. That contains 2 million pixels, give or take, 2,073,000. So 2 million pixels. You can count them if you feel like it, but it's going to take you a while. So let's work on 2 million pixels. And at the same time, we're going to take a poker machine with 33 stops per reel, right? So that's 40 million outcomes. So now I'm going to get you to picture a big wall of computer screens, 5 screens wide and 4 screens high. That's around about 40 million pixels. So with that picture in your head of the 5 screens across and 4 screens high, let's picture that they're white screens, okay? All those pixels are white. So you've got a wall of 20 white screens in front of you. Now, the only complication is there's one magic pixel. It's yellow. Now, what I want you to do is close your eyes and get your imaginary ultrafine laser pointer out and point it at that wall of televisions. Now, I want you to zoom right in and have a look at the pixel that you're pointing to. So is that pixel yellow? Yes, good, you won the jackpot. If not, then try again. Did you pick it this time? Point your laser pointer again. Did you pick it? No, then you might be feeling that this is going to be really, really, really hard. It's not impossible, but beyond what most people would consider fair. Now, to make matters worse, there's another trick that RNGs can pull on you, which doesn't affect the outcome, but it stops any influence on the machine or being able to read the machine or know where it might be in its range of possible outcomes. Every time you push a laser pointer in our little game here, and you go to point at that magic pixel, hopefully, that pixel moves. So, in fact, what happens is all the pixels rearrange themselves on that screen every time you push the laser. So, by doing that, you can understand this is a pretty unfair game, right? You've got 40 million pixels on the wall. One of them's a yellow pixel. You push your laser pointer to push at that pixel where you think it might be, and suddenly the pixels shuffle. Does it affect your chances of hitting the pixel? No. Mathematically, no. It does not affect your chances of hitting the pixel. You don't know where it is. You're having a random punt, pointing your laser pointer at the screen. You may hit it or you may not, right? But it does not change the outcome. So, for this example, I want you to now picture you're playing a $1 machine. So every time you put in a dollar coin or you put in your money and you press play, we're still working on a machine with 33 real stops. To explore every possible outcome of that machine is going to cost you $40 million if you do it once. At 5 seconds per game, that's going to take you around 19 years. If you have your player's card jammed in the spin button for 8 hours a day, every day for 19 years, it's going to take you that long and $40 million to explore that range of possible outcomes in the machine. Now, hopefully that's given you a little bit of an idea of what we're dealing with. And Adrian, if you've got any questions or...
Yeah, I really like this analogy when we were talking before today, this sense that yes, it's not impossible, but when we sort of picture this massive wall of screens and all these pixels that are constantly kind of moving, it just really becomes, quite hard and doesn't seem too fair. But I do want to kind of clarify, when you say like it would cost you $40 million, that's assuming that despite the pixels constantly moving and just, you only pick every pixel once. It's entirely possible that you could sit there at, with your card jammed in the machine for 8 hours a day, every day for 19 years and get a lot of the pixels that you don't want, not the magic yellow pixel, multiple times. And so it just shows you just the scope of how unfair this whole scenario is.
Yeah, and I mean, look, that's skewed a little bit by the fact that during that time, look, let's keep it simple and assume that we've got an even distribution, and in that 40 million hits, you're going to get one of each number. You're going to get two things. You're going to get paybacks for what you've played, so it will pay, and there'll be times when you feel a little bit ahead or a little bit behind. But ultimately, over that, we consider that, and that's actually one of the tools I wrote at IGT, is called a soak test. And what it will do, we'll run through that range of outcomes across all those outcomes once. It'll go through the entire cycle of the machine, and it'll give you a number at the end based on how much money's been wagered and how much money's been paid out, and that's going to be your return to player. And that number has to be, whatever the determined percentage is, return to player percentage is for that jurisdiction. Now, that might change slightly, but I think in New South Wales, I think clubs are 85% and pubs are 87%. So
is that standard or as a minimum, David?
That's the minimum.
Right.
Yeah. Look, that was the information I was able to glean at the moment. I don't have access to that definitively. and I didn't dig deeply into it, but that's around about what we played to. I mean, when I was writing, working on the machines, the game designers, some of the games would be 92%, but I mean, I heard a rumor once that the machines at the door of Las Vegas casinos pay 104%, but they're very, very small wagering amounts to get you in. But that was all hearsay, so I don't know. But in general, yeah, between sort of 85 and 92% would be a good number to work with.
Right. And I guess that's a good segue into probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of poker machines is that return to play percentage or RTP. Though, when I'm working with clients, sometimes I like to phrase it as RIP, return to industry percentage, because it certainly highlights the unfairness to the person that's actually playing. So could you speak a little bit more about, you mentioned the soak test that you came up with. You mentioned the fact that, you will kind of, as a mathematician, a computer scientist, go through and rigorously ensure that the game will produce an overall picture in the favor, or certainly not in the favor of the patron. Could you speak a little bit more to that, David?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, I mean, the RTP ranges that I've worked on for the purpose of our discussion are 85% for clubs in New South Wales and 87% for pubs. So a game reel set, as I described before, is an analog to a physical reel on the old school poker machine. So they're designed by game designers as opposed to game developers. So a game developer would work on the code and the mathematics, not so much the mathematics, but the actual logic behind the games and the way the games play. Whereas the game designer will base the feel of the game, if you like, on their own experience. So as I said, I mean, a lot of, well, I can't think of many examples of game designers where I worked that weren't players themselves. Now, normally that sequence is, there's a sequence of development there. So normally the game designer will come up with a game concept that'll be play tested by themselves. So they'll have a machine at their desk. They'll load their reel stops up, have the art department send the artwork, the game developers with the game base or the game code, and that will be play tested by them. And then they'll pass that around the department to the other game designers and see how it feels to play, right? Now, I don't want to go too far down this track, but different machines have different volatility. And that volatility is regional. So in regions of Sydney, you'll have games of different volatility, like a bowling club might give you the small adrenaline hits, small denomination machines paying more frequently, but paying lower amounts. Whereas a high volatility machine will not pay very frequently, but it'll pay huge amounts when it does pay. Different patrons have preferences. And that's pretty common knowledge around, different cultural backgrounds and things like that. Everyone has a different tolerance. Anyway, look, I won't sidetrack.
Just to interject, David, and apologies because I don't have the visual feedback. Sometimes not sure if the point's finished, but something that really jumped out to me when you're talking about, what you were involved with for all those years at IGT. Is that the people involved in the process, from concept popping up in their head to, getting the visuals, to kind of putting it together, seeing what it's like to engage with those visuals, and then build the actual game design in the background. The word that is emitted is the psychologist. There's often this belief that it's the big driver of all these poker machines, and how come, people do get harm from them is because, psychologists are the people there, pulling the strings in the development. But from what I'm hearing, and, please speak more if I haven't got this right, it's more mathematicians at the end of the day that kind of have the final say. They're the ones that say, yes, the RNG has its integrity. Yes, the real stops give what we expect. Yes, the soak test says that this is what the true percentage give back would be certainly less than a fair amount. Is that kind of right, David?
That's 100% correct, Adrian. So, I mean, game designers are not psychologists. They're players and they know what they like to play. Now, yeah, if I was a player, I'd want to see lots of money, but sadly, that's not going to work. But ultimately, yes, mathematicians have the final say on the approvals process, which I'll get to, because what you say the machine does is what the machine will do in the field. And if it doesn't, then you potentially could have a bit of trouble with your regulators down the track. And I mean, when I say trouble with the regulators, I'm talking about, well, you've got a license and it's like going too fast on the roads. You do it if you drive too fast on your way down to the snowy mountains in wintertime, you're probably going to lose your license. It's exactly the same thing. So you're there, obviously. It's basically a way of policing the industry, and you want to do the right thing. I mean, you want to create a good product, whatever that product might be, whatever you think of that product. You want to make it good, and as an engineer, you want to make it the best you can possibly do as a good engineer. So yeah, and it's very objective. It's like, well, okay, this is how the machine plays, but it's paying 96%. We need to make that better. Now, to the game designer, you need to go back and you need to make it play the same, but you need to make it return that percentage. Now, obviously they've got experience. I mean, they've developed dozens of games before in their career, and they know everybody knows the fundamental mathematics of it. Now, while a game designer may not have the mathematical approach to that game, they know what works and what doesn't roughly. And then there's a little bit of give and take. So I guess, does that answer your question, Adrian?
No, that's a really helpful clarification, because it's certainly a common perception that it is worthwhile diving into, is that the reality is that the game design produces over time, as you spoke about before, randomly generated losses over time, because that's what the engineers and the computer scientists and the mathematicians have ensured before it reaches the public, and that's the crux of it. And if it wasn't the case, then if it wasn't have so much integrity, it actually could be even more unfair for the patient when it gets out in the community.
Yeah, and I think we might touch on that a little bit later on if we get time with the myth busting. So, look, the game is written and play tested, and it's tested for its feel by the game designers. And occasionally at lunchtime, you might go and test out a few games, in your lunch break, and sort of play it and see how it feels. I mean, as an engineer, as a mathematician, I find it very difficult to do that, because it's like, oh, well, whatever, I'm pushing a button and I'm seeing a bunch of colorful things. It just doesn't appeal to me personally, but there was a lot of people who, enjoyed doing that. So once that game's submitted internally, it goes to a mathematical tool that we had it was developed by a contracted mathematician, and basically evaluated those games. Now that, look, I can't really get into the intricacies of it for two reasons. One, because I don't fully understand it myself, and secondly, it's probably a proprietary tool that I probably shouldn't talk on. But I mean, once that goes through, probably a more true test is the test that I designed later on, called the soak test. And what that did was basically it took all the graphical elements out of the game, anything that slowed the machine down with anything that wasn't relevant to the outcome of the game, which is interesting because, I mean, the whole game, you take away all those visual elements and sounds, I mean, it still plays, and it will still play exactly the same. So part of a soak test was you strip all that out, you take the game code, you take the reals, and then you would run through every possible outcome of that machine, and it would spit out after a couple of hours, it would spit out a number. And that was your true return to player across that soak test, across the entire machine, the entire range of outcomes. So Each game may have a couple of variations in it. It might be shipped with a couple of variations. Now, they may have slightly different return to player percentages. It may be an option that the venue wants. But every single game, every single variation, every single alteration must be approved by a third-party state testing authority. Now, that used to be the government would test it, and then they handed that off to, they privatized that, I guess, for want of a better term. Now, those game alterations, that code is locked insofar as it is digitally signed, and it cannot be altered once that checksum is generated. You can't fiddle with it. It is burnt into a physical ROM chip, a read-only memory chip, and it can't be altered without a UV programmer, basically. Look, that may have changed in recent years. I'm not too sure of the current regulations, obviously, 2 decades plus a year on. But generally, yeah, that was burnt in. A sticker was put on it over it with a checksum. It could be popped out of the machine. It could be put into a reader, and you could generate that checksum and make sure and validate that that game was true and correct. So, and that was, I think from memory, that was actually tested internally within the machine as part of its routine checks. It would calculate its own checksum and make sure it was playing to what it was programmed to play. In terms of the actual overriding code.
Just to highlight something else that really resonated with me, because I speak about it with my own clients when I go through kind of how do pokies work, is you said, like, when you're developing that SOAP test, you're kind of stripping away all the superfluous elements, like the visuals, the graphics, etc. And that's the reality, is that all those things are kind of superfluous to the actual mechanics of the game, but yet they're the only things that the patron sees when they walk into the venue, and they're the only things that they create these false beliefs and build these misconceptions about, when the reality is they're all superfluous. It's just this background, rigorously tested, hard-coded computer software, mathematical processes.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And that's a really, really good point to make, Adrian. Yeah. When you strip down all the bells and whistles, it's just a program running in the background that, the only event it responds to is you pressing a button. And it doesn't know, the machine doesn't know. And this is a really critical point. The machine does not know what the next outcome is going to be until you push that button. Okay?
Yeah.
The machine does not know what it is going to do next until you push that button.
Yeah, it's a bit like that when you talk about the analogy before of the pixels on the screen, right? The sort of that are constantly moving, and there's that one magic yellow pixel. That those screens don't have any understanding of where the pixels currently are. And just your input is to point the laser, and then it goes, oh, okay, it was that pixel. Sure. But then immediately, before sort of you can even imagine how fast the random generator is going, before we can even comprehend a moment in time, it's already just still in that sort of state of flux again.
Yeah. You can guarantee there will be an outcome, but you don't know what the outcome is.
Yeah.
And that's a really important point. So once games are out in the field, they're monitored by attendants using the money wagered, money in, money out equations. So you can actively check that over a game. And look, in a short space of time, like in less than, what did we say, 19 years, those machines may deviate a little bit from that return to player slightly, but not significally. And they should.
When you say deviate, like as they should, right? Because again, there's not predetermined. It's just trying to reflect its inbuilt game design. But to what extent would it might be deviating?
Well, it depends on your time scale. So over an infinite scale, it won't deviate at all. Right? But you might say from installation, but you've still got to work on that infinite scale. Now, we've been talking about, we've been putting constraints on our thinking to make it easier to understand. But once you extrapolate that out to an infinite scale, the return to play is fixed. It doesn't deviate.
Yeah.
Okay. It's hard to understand, but it doesn't deviate.
Yeah, it's difficult to understand, like these large numbers and these processes just going continuously.
I mean, if your time scale is 3 plays and one of those plays hits a jackpot, then yeah, of course, your return to player is going to change, but the machine return to play isn't going to change. Okay. So anyway, and another thing to remember is all of those events contribute to the all events that contribute to that return to play are logged. Now, this was another point. So when they take it that seriously, that every machine must survive a battery of tests. So I think, I can't remember how they did the ESD test, but I remember walking past the room, and it was they could do like simulate lightning strike tests on machines. Wow. Things like power brownouts, where so between a power switching off and a power going out is a period called a brownout. Now that might be, with a transformer, that might be a couple of milliseconds, but a machine is designed in such a way that during that brownout period, it will prioritize retaining its state. And it is tested to do that. You can flick the power off and on, everything, whatever you want to do, and it must be 100% reliable and never lose the machine state in any circumstance. Okay.
So when you say that, that sort of what kind of jumps up in my head is when I hear clients say, oh, they'll the venue will open up its doors for the day, and overnight it's move machines around or turn them on or off or whatever, because it randomly there were too many wins a day before, and it's like, nope, the machine is the machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all logged and auditable. There's a log in the machine, and that does get audited. Now that could be internally audited to make sure the venue's getting their money's worth out of the machine.
Yeah, of course.
But equally externally monitored to make sure no one's fiddling around. But I mean, the point of it is, there's nothing that a venue can do to change the outcome of the machines. There's nothing a player can do to change the outcome of the machines. They're tested, they're soak tested. There's no interface in the machine where you can manipulate that by design.
Yeah, and that's when people like yourselves, people understand the language I don't, mathematics, right? That kind of come in and ensure the integrity of the whole process.
And look, again, I mean, coming back to being an engineer, I mean, when you're an engineer, you're taught for, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years at uni, that, you've got this sense of integrity where you want to build, hopefully, the best machine you possibly can. There's an arm's length, transaction there happening between the company giving you a spec and you as an engineer coming up with a design to that. Now, if they say, right, here's the rules that aren't the company's rules, they're the government's rules, you're designing around that, don't make it manipulable, then any decent engineer is going to go, right, well, we'll design around that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am mindful that we're almost hitting the hour mark, and I have seen that there are some really awesome and inquisitive comments and questions coming through. So I want to make sure that we certainly can address those, any others that come up.
Okay.
But is there anything, I guess, from these 3 core elements of the part of the poker machine that we can't see, right? The world that Robert isn't able to observe, but yet the world that he needs to understand, to make different or healthier betting decisions, the random generator, the real stops, the RTP, that you like to further go into or reiterate, David?
Look, not really. I mean, I think I've covered the key points. I mean, obviously I'm not a psychologist, and I understand most of our audience probably are psychologists, but look, I know we've got to have time for questions, so I won't go too far into this, but I mean, the personification of the machine. Like people assign, and we're trained by companies like Apple and Microsoft and everybody, they're friendly computers. We're trained to see computers and any electronic device is friendly. Your vacuum cleaner's got a smiley face on it, like everything has to relate back to humans. We're taught that from children, when we're children. So I mean, one of the things I've noted just quickly recently, obviously being quite into AI, we've been doing quite a bit of research into AI and developing systems and working with customers. And one of the things I find really interesting, and it's across the board, is when I'm evaluating people's interaction with AI. Like a lot of your audience might have seen ChatGPT or other systems. One of the things I find fascinating is, without fail, all the human subjects, as I call them, use please, thank you. They use human terms, like human pleasantries when dealing with a machine that's purely objective. I mean, AI takes your syllables, breaks them up into something they call tokens, which are, for want of a better term, syllables. All it does is draw a mathematical analogy between one set and another set, and finds a logical path. It doesn't care whether you say please or thank you, and it's exactly the same with an EGM. You can rub it, touch it, whatever you want to do. I mean, it's not going to change the outcome.
Yeah, and I've certainly heard about that from clients over the years, and it kind of links back to that thing you said before, like the poker machine just does not know.
No.
And so it certainly does not know what your personal circumstances are. It does not know the reason why you walked into the venue. Does it know what particular motivation you have? All it knows is that I'm programmed to operate in a certain way over an infinite period of time, and that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got this human concept of luck, and I mean, some cultures associate with colors, some people associate with feelings, some people it's a bit more ethereal, spiritual, but none of that comes into it. I've written the machines, I've coded the machines. Like it is purely objective. There's nothing emotional. There's nothing emotional about it. I mean, the closest thing you'll have to an emotion is the emotion that's triggered inside you by that game designer, I should say, the game designer who has designed it to a feel. The artist who has spent 2 or 3 weeks coming up with a reel set that's engaging, that's pretty to look at. But that is the only interface into your mind. It's not. It's purely an objective number machine. It is just a computer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate all those insights. And some of the teams today might be aware that the way that we crossed paths was, for lack of a better word, very fortuitous. It was a bit over a year ago at a community engagement event, out in sort of the inner west of Sydney. And so, it was just I jumped on this opportunity to, get you to present to our broader gambling, treatment and research and community and other aspects of it, because we've got these amazing insights from yourself, someone that was, part of the process to make some of the systems that are probably still in play decades later. So thank you so much for this information. I may just move straight to the question and answers. And if we do get time, or they relate to some of those myths that we noted before, then that's great. But I want to try and get to it. So I'll sort of start with Mark. You mentioned this earlier when you were speaking about your journey through IGT, David. He mentioned that you identified some issues in the random number generator that you then fixed and became sort of an integral part of IGT. Are you able to expand on that?
Yeah, look, I suppose the wording I used was probably sounded a little bit sinister. It was more a case. I can't recall. I can't honestly recall the number generator that we eventually settled on. There's a number of different random number generators. There's a number of different ways to generate random numbers. I suppose to suffice to say, I found a random number generator that gave a smoother histogram.
Mm.
I mean, there's a range of tolerances, but I found a way. There was some. So when you, I've got to try and explain this the right way. You have a range of random numbers and you have a histogram. Now, as an engineer, you want to see that perfect, right? When you run a battery of tests that you don't, some of them were actually a bit tricky to understand. To get that distribution as even as possible, I found a better way of doing it. That's probably the best way to say it. I mean, there were no issues that didn't pass regulation, but I just found a better way of doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Mark.
I'll skip ahead to something a little bit more recent. Someone was asking about how like the double or nothing gamble option on poker machines, how it might interact in any ways with the RTP calculations. Are you able to speak to that? Was that something that came across when you were working at IGT and developing the game design?
So that was, does the double up affect the RTP?
Yeah, like so.
Okay, so all side games. So every game is designed at its simplest with real stops. You push a button, you lose money, you win money. Some games allow you to wager by doubling your bet. Some games will have a feature. Some games will have a linked jackpot. Right. All of those features will affect the return to player, but that is all considered as part of the return to player at time of submission of the game.
Right.
Okay. So you doubling up will take you into expected value from an investment, but that's probably beyond the scope of what we're talking about. But the bottom line is it will not affect the return to player.
Yes, because it's sort of like
it's already considered. It's already baked into the game.
Yeah.
It's already baked into that return to player calculation. It will not, it won't change the outcome when you're sitting in your chair.
Yeah. So sort of how it works is I've pressed the button and I've landed on pixel A out of my 40 million pixels, and pixel A says that I've won $100. I can then choose to wager that $100. I either will get nothing or none of that will be returned, or I'll turn that into $200. That's like a separate process to the actual RTP calculation.
Yeah, and in making that decision, it's more a financial decision based on expected value. But in terms of your interaction with the machine, it will not affect your return to player.
Yeah. Okay. And kind of on a related note, Monica has asked, is it correct that machines are now linked up so that the RTP is not specific to a machine, but to a club, a pub, a casino site? I have heard similar things like in terms of, how to link jackpots work. And I'm not sure if that was an aspect of IGT's game design, in the early 2000s or something that's a little bit more recent. Are you able to speak to that?
Linked jackpots were around. Now, look, I've got to qualify that, it's been 20 years, so my knowledge may not be 100%, but from what I understand, again, that return to player considers every side game. Now, the linked jackpot is just another side game mathematically. So if you're playing for a huge linked jackpot and you take that linked jackpot out, that machine will exclude that element from the return to player. So the machine, again, the scale of the numbers is so huge.
Yeah.
And especially when practitioners are explaining this to their patients, it doesn't change in your short time span that you're playing the machine. But yes, the return to player will incorporate that mega jackpot or that linked jackpot.
Yeah.
So all machines and all games attached to that linked jackpot, certainly when I was in the industry, the base return to player might only be 40% or 50% or whatever, pick a number, plus the component from that linked jackpot.
Yeah. And
so if you took a machine off that link and and just played it like a normal machine, yes, it would have a pretty dismal return to player.
Yeah,
from
yeah.
a player's perspective. Yeah.
Yes. Certainly the venue might think differently. And again, it's sort of that analogy of the pixels on the screen. That one magic yellow pixel is incorporated into the ITP. If you took it out, the parameters do change.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make sure that I've marked that off. So thanks, Monica, for that question. I did have something that just came through, and I actually can speak from my own experience. Someone asked to clarify why the wheels keep rolling after the button's being pressed, even though the set of random numbers has already been worked out. Just like when I point my laser pointer at the pixel. When I was at Aristocrat last year, what they mentioned is that's just like an element of the original lever type machines from back in the day, where the drums sort of happen one after the other based on the springs and all the environmental inputs, and it's just sort of kept the way. And I do know in some jurisdictions, like in America, you can actually ask, well, there we go, I personified the machine straight away. I've asked the machine, you can actually press a button and the machine will just show them all immediately. Are you able to speak at that at all, David?
It's a shame my camera's not working, because I got this huge grin on my face. It's taking me back to a couple, like we used to have meetings for everything at IGT. And I remember a number of meetings, one in particular, where we were discussing real bounce. And there was two engineers arguing, should it be a linear or logarithmic bounce? And these engineers were talking about, but these were game developers. These were the guys that were saying, how does it look to the player? Like we used to have arguments. And I mean, if anyone that I worked with is watching this video, I know a few people who will probably laugh when I talk about the color gold. There was one artist at IGT who could make the color gold on a screen. No one else could make gold. You're making it look like gold. You've got all these visual elements, but the bottom line is the outcome is set, right? You push the button, the outcome's set. Now, how that looks to you as a player, it can present it any way it likes. It can change colors, it can spin around, it can do whatever it wants. But the ultimate, you've got game start when you push the button, game end when you get the outcome. Now, whatever happens in between there is all a visual effect. It has absolutely no effect on the outcome. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I do note part of the question, like this sense of, is it a way, to get our brain to kind of, have some positive expectancy? Is it our way to kind of orientate our our frame of reference to, oh, well, maybe, I will win the next bet. But the reality is, from what I'm understanding from you, is from a mathematical or computer science point of view, like it can just all occur at once, because it's all determined simultaneously. It's just whatever the personal preference is.
I will add, Adrian, that there are elements there. I mean, the faster the machine plays, the faster the return to player returns money to the business. So if you give the player an option of saying, let's cut out the real bounce, let's cut out 50 or 100 milliseconds of play, then that 50 or 100 milliseconds on an economy of scale makes a much larger difference to the actual, rate at which people are playing the machines.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just ask, keep sending your questions through if things are coming up as we answer existing questions. I'm appreciating all the feedback. Someone didn't put their name, asking, well, 33 starting positions times 5, 33 to power 5, sorry, 40 million outcomes. There may have been Aristocrat with me last year. And I do record Aristocrat saying, that for them it was more so in the billions. Would that be a case, David, where for their particular game that they were talking about, they just had a longer stopping position? Maybe it was 64 or 100, and so when you power that out, you get an even larger number. Would that be the case?
Yeah, look, it might have been I can't comment on the number of real stops or the actual game design. I mean, as I said, I qualified everything I said as easy for me to manage with 33 stops per reel.
Yeah.
You might have 50, you might have 60, but you're talking about, and each reel can have a different number of stops in an EGM. Whereas on a physical reel, those numbers are fixed. So that is a difference between an EGM and a traditional mechanical poker machine, in that you can have a different number of reel stops. Now, they are fixed, as I've said. They're fixed, they're burnt into the ROM, but they are revealed. They are, they're part of the game design. They're upfront about the game design. Now, the number of outcomes, if it's 5 billion, then that will be an equation based on the number of reel stops for that particular game.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. I may just kind of quickly skip to some of those myth busters that we, because these are things that commonly come up in my personal clinical experience from clients, but I do know other clinicians I've worked with in various capacities over the years have heard similar twos. It's like, well, since like, do the venues give the gaming companies kickbacks, and if not, how do they actually, the gaming company, make their money if the RTP, as it's happening in the real world in real time, is revenue for the venue itself? Are you able to speak at all to that, David?
Yeah, look, I got to be honest, I'm not intimate with the financing details at IGT when I was there. Look, my impression when I worked there was the company in Australia was largely supported by the US parent company. I don't know whether we were profitable or not when I was there. So I know in the US, a lot of the revenue came from the interest I understand the company had a trust to pay out the mega jackpots in the US, which are those, you've won $1 billion or whatever, but it's paid as an annuity. And I understand there was a huge amount of interest on the trusts for that. IGT, when I worked there, they didn't pay dividends. Share values were good, and my stock options were pretty good. Yeah, look, I don't know about kickbacks and things like that. I mean, look, there was always pressure to create and release new variations of games because they're based on a common hardware platform. So we had, one main platform, and then while I was there, I was involved in the development of a new platform, that was a huge undertaking. It's hard to explain, but every single part of that machine needs to be scrutinized, internally and externally, and it has to work, and that for me as a lower level programmer, I mean, I love that stuff, it's like a challenge. So you had machine sales, selling the machines to venues. That's your, 10 machines per pub. And, I mean, some of the clubs were staggering even when I worked there, how many machines they had. But then on top of that, you've got game sales. So it's similar to your home computer or your Nintendo or your Sega or your Xbox or whatever it might be. The pressure to create games was always there. But every one of those games and game variations had to be internally and externally tested. And there was obviously a cost to that, in staff, in terms of regulators and stuff like that. Everything was digitally signed before it was released. So that process went on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's really useful to know, because it's like, well, whether IGT, from their perspective is, we have the nuts and bolts of it. It's the core components, as you worked on many decades ago. It's still in its form, or very similar form to this day. It's just the bits around it. I rewrote that point I made earlier. The visuals, the auditory components, the actual way that the machine is presented with how many screens. That's all just stuff around. That's the architecture, for lack of a better word, for the fundamental engineering that's in it. And there's a demarcation line there between what you see and what is how the game's playing. Ultimately, you see the outcome of that mathematics, but
the rest of it's all just fluff.
Yeah. Okay. And another myth that I think was worth sort of us speaking to our audience here before I go back to our questions is, there's this sense that the jackpots seem to be won by people who are betting the maximum amount more so than people betting any other amounts. There's a sense of, that it's a way of influencing the RTP over the short period of time that you happen to be sitting in the pub. And I'm wondering, are you able to sort of comment on that?
Again, let's look at timescales. So basically, we'll take the example of betting the maximum bet, right? Maximum pay lines, maximum bet. The number of pay lines you play simply accelerates the rate at which you're playing the game over exactly the same range of possible outcomes. Whether that's 1, 5, or 273, it does not change. And the way those pay lines are arranged does not change or fundamentally alter the way those reels work. If you look at them carefully, you will see if you stretch out every pay line, they all evaluate to one straight line through the machine. Now, some games, I remember a couple of games there where the last symbol would expand. But again, that's all considered in the RTP, right? Betting more money, again, it just comes back to your RTP. You're just putting more money through the machine. But I mean, the fundamental reason for adding those features, for want of a better word, is they don't alter the RTP. They just simply change the rate at which you wager money over time. So if whether you compress time or extend time, the outcomes will always be the same.
Yeah. I guess the analogy that I've sort of tried to give clients over the years is that, like, there's this hill that's infinitely long, and it's at a certain gradient, sloping downwards, and all you're really doing is just adding, rocks into a bag, and so the more rocks you add, the faster it may roll down the hill. But the same gradient always apply, and it's always this infinite. Would that sort of
on an infinite time scale? I mean, you may have different outcomes from that RNG. Obviously, that's why it's random. It's random. It's luck. It's chance. But all you're doing fundamentally is compressing time.
Yeah. Okay. I am aware that we're getting close to 10:30, and people may have booked other things afterwards. There is one of the questions that I think is really useful, maybe to start wrapping up with. And for those that have other questions, I apologize we weren't able to get to them. You're welcome to email me afterwards, and I can forward them through to David, and then send it back to you. The question was that if you were to note one piece of information or nugget of truth, as it was said, based on what you saw, learned, contributed to IGT, to tell people who gamble on poker machines to kind of turn them off, to de-incline them, what would be that thing? I know it's sort of trying to distill, a lot into one note, but is there something that comes to mind as like, that's just really important to know?
Look, again, I'm not a psychologist. I mean, it's a difficult one. I mean, remembering the analogy I gave with the pixels on the screen, knowing that the machine outcome is determined when you push the button, knowing that the machine doesn't know what the machine's going to do in the next 5 seconds of game cycle. It doesn't know the outcome until you push that button. And nothing you do or say can influence that outcome. Okay.
Right.
It's purely luck. And I mean, I guess that's the thing that I've seen. Look, I've had friends who have been problem gamblers, and in one respect, it cost him his life. But look, it's hard to pull blame because I know so many good people in the industry, and everybody's good at what they do.
Mm.
But gambling problems, I don't have a solution, and I hope you guys can find it, but yeah, knowing what I know, it can be very frustrating listening to people with their stories and their theories and things like that. And what I hope I've done today is just cut through a lot of that to give you the raw facts, because it's important for me to do that. And make your own decisions. If you like looking at colored reels and spinny pictures and having a flutter or whatever might be a passion for you, good luck to you, but don't expect something that's not there.
Yeah, great.
Don't make something of it that it isn't. Don't make it into something it isn't. Okay, I mean, if that's how you find your entertainment, that's great, but it's purely a mathematical machine. You push a button, it determines an outcome, it plays a game to that outcome, and then the cycle starts all over again. That game loop starts all over again.
Right. Well, thank you, David, for taking the time, not only today, but in preparation for today. I hope this has been as useful for yourself as I know it's been beneficial and informative for me and all our participants today. I thank everyone for pushing through the lack of the video difficulties that we had. I'm glad the audio still crystal clear throughout. And if you do have questions, if you ever review or look back at this video again, you're more than welcome to email me and I forward stuff through to David. For those that left early and are rewatching this video, thanks for coming back. In terms of looking ahead, so there'll be some emails soon, so I will be spamming your inbox once again, probably in the next couple of weeks. If you want to note down, it's going to be Thursday the 9th of May, so a bit under 2 months' time, so you're not going to have to wait too long for our next journal club. I'll have more information in the email that I send out where you can register, but we got a guest speaker based in North America, and we're looking at the concept of nostalgia in behavioral decisions, and certainly how it kind of relates to looking at this idea of early positive experiences, how it kind of impacts decisions around gambling. So I hope you're excited for that. I hope you register and attend that too. Thank you for everyone to coming today, and I'll see you all shortly.